Sometimes in 1492, the Italian philosopher Marsilio Ficino wrote a letter to his friend, Paul of Middelburg. And the letter is striking. You can read it on your slide, because for Ficino, they lived in a golden age, an age of light. Ficino, like others in Italy at the time, believed they lived in a truly exceptional age. And that age was given centuries later the name Renaissance, which means rebirth. Indeed, it is the age that saw the rebirth of classical poetry, prose, and art. And all of that Europeans admired and took inspiration from the Greeks and the Romans. Most scholars wanted to capture the lost glory that is lost during what they considered the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages, which range from 600 to 1400, and had a particular reverence for the arts and believed that the arts were best served in cities as the measure of civilization. This is an age when there is a new consciousness of modernity being modern and individualism, or the age of civic humanism, as you can see in your slide. It involved the revival of Latin and Greek, but most importantly, it signaled a decisive move away from a world where only God provided an explanation for what happened. Now, these Renaissance scholars believe that humanity had unlimited potential and that through knowledge and inquiry, one could expand ordinary life. This will open the doors for scientific investigation and other forms of exploration. But it was also a moment, as you learned in your textbook, when Europe, after the devastation and millions of deaths brought about by the Black Death, enjoyed a striking economic revival and prosperity despite numerous wars. And the Renaissance was important in Italy, France, Spain, the Low Countries, and Central Europe. The Renaissance is also a paradox. Ficino wrote his comment in 1492, and that year is momentous because of two events. It is the year when Christopher Columbus set foot on America, not discovering a new world, but colonizing a world he encountered through beginning what was to be named imperialism with the slave trade and slavery, as well as the massacre and deaths of millions of indigenous peoples. So economic prosperity is fueled by the beginning of colonialism and then becomes concentrated in a few European countries: Portugal, Spain, France, and England. The second momentous event is the expulsion of Jews from Spain. Almost 400,000 people left or were forced to leave. This was a huge diasporic moment that signals a desire on the part of Europeans to create homogeneous and bounded communities where those considered different are seen as inferior and to be disciplined. Now, what I want to talk to you about today is one of the quintessential Renaissance men and humanism, Leonardo da Vinci. As you can see on your slide, Leonardo da Vinci epitomizes the kind of cultural flourishing that took place during the Renaissance, the golden age that ranges from the liberal arts to science and military inventions. Leonardo was born near the small town of Vinci in 1452, which lies between Pisa and Florence in northern Italy, as you can see on this slide. In 1465, the teenage Leonardo was taken to Florence, where his father apprenticed him with the distinguished artist Andrea del Verrocchio. At the time, Florence was ruled by the wealthy banking family of the Medici, and you can see a portrait, Lorenzo de' Medici, on your slide. And at the time, the Medicis were the richest Italian family, whose members played a huge role in both politics and art. They were often patron of artists, helping build churches and libraries, improving the city so much that it became the cultural center of Europe. This was a place where artists flocked, such as Sandro Botticelli, who, while at the service of the Medicis, painted some of the most Renaissance paintings with a celebration of Greek and Roman themes and emerging humanism. You can see the slides with some of these famous paintings that are also in your textbooks, but also the kinds of religious portraits that would have been in vogue at the time. So, unlike Botticelli, Verrocchio was in fact a second-rate artist and sculptor whose best work was executed in gold and silver. However, he was wealthy, he had the right connections, and was well known. And his studio was really a workshop of sorts. In there were made tableware, ornaments, monuments, metalwork, alongside painting and sculptures. When Leonardo finished his apprenticeship in 1472, he had become the leading painter in Verrocchio's studios. So in 1481, he decided to leave Florence, and he wrote a letter of introduction for Ludovico Sforza, the Prince of Milan, to convince him to become his patron. And in this letter, Leonardo outlined some of his inventions. He wrote about light and transportable bridges, rudimentary water pumps, mortars to fling stones, covered chariots, catapults, and he concluded, I can carry out sculpture in marble, bronze, or clay, and I can do painting in whatever may be done as well as any other, be who he may. So why did he begin with his inventions and not his artistic abilities? Because princes were also leaders at war, and a patron was interested in those who could help strengthen his power, be it in the arts, cultural, or military. So the list of inventions was accepted by Sforza, and Leonardo moved to court in Milan in 1482, where he remained until 1499, when Sforza was forcibly deposed. Now, one might ask, why had Leonardo left Florence? Well, he left Florence for many reasons. It had become a city of entrenched traditions. This is where the classic Renaissance took place. It had beautiful libraries with hundreds of Greek and Roman manuscripts, and that the Medicis had even recreated Plato's Academy, the school that was located in Athens and closed by Justinian in the 7th century. But by the time of Leonardo, Florence was no longer the place where novelties flourished. It was backward-looking and a city of entrenched tradition. So, with this in mind, seeking the new, or where he would be free to seek the new, he moved to Milan, the center of new painting in Italy. And in Milan, he was incredibly productive in those years and penned some of his most famous paintings, like The Last Supper, you can see on your slide. And he especially refined the practice of perspective, which was the innovation of the period and gave the illusion of three-dimensional space. This was characteristic of paintings of the period, but it is Leonardo, who is also an engineer by training, who perfected it. And you can see this in the two paintings that are now on your slide. So one could say Leonardo was as forward-looking as the city of Milan, and there he was able to turn his attention to mathematics and experimentations, and those fields of studies that would become instrumental to an astronomer like Copernicus, who centuries later attacked the idea that the sun was at the center of the universe, or Galileo, who showed how the Earth was not unchanging, but part of a moving system of planets revolving around the sun. So Leonardo embodies the Renaissance spirit because he had a thirst for what was new and innovative. He wanted to grasp the human and nature through his senses and not through books or reflection or philosophical displays of talent. And in this sense, he differed from other Renaissance artists and scholars. Now, it's been said that Leonardo had a camera eye for detail, and it was with this spirit and quality that he observed the world around him. Indeed, he wanted to observe, discover, and invent. And in Milan, he was free to follow his interest in science wherever it took him. So he studied anatomy and made drawings of blood vessels, for instance. You can see on the slide. And what he looked for when he drew the human figure, animals or plants, was structure. This was how he believed nature revealed its meaning to humankind. Purpose was expressed in structure. And like the scientific inventors and revolutionaries of the 16th and 17th centuries, Leonardo was looking for the mechanism which moved creatures. And this is best expressed in one of his most famous drawings, that of the Vitruvian Man. It was inspired by the Roman architect Vitruvius, who explained that the human figure expressed ideal proportions. And this image is fascinating because it reveals how some, like Leonardo, challenged a world governed by faith and revelation, and instead turned to nature, human imagination, and what we would now call science. This image shows how he blended art and science, and how he tried to relate the human to nature. At the same time, Leonardo was not just an artist, he was an engineer of sorts. For instance, he imagined a flying machine, which he called the ornithoptex, and you can see it on your slide. But there were other machines as well, machines to grind lenses and cut screws and files. He drew up plans for conveyors, excavators, water pumps, bridges, rolling mills. And why would these be important? Because war was also on the minds of his patrons. Now, Leonardo fled Milan when the French deposed Sforza in 1499. His life at first seemed to fall apart, and in the following years, he went from patron to patron. In 1502, he became a military engineer for Cesare Borgia. He eventually moved back to Florence, where he had been commissioned by the city to paint two patriotic pictures, neither of which were ever finished. In fact, he is well known to have spent the period of 1503 to 1506 painting the wife of an obscure Florentine merchant, Francesco del Giocondo, which has probably become one of his most well-known works. This is the Mona Lisa, also known as La Gioconda, as you can see on your slide. Now, why is it so famous? Because this painting is a tiny one, not a large one, not a mural, not an expensive one. Well, it's captivated many because of the mystery the painting expresses, as shown in the famous smile of the Mona Lisa. Vasari, an art critic, wrote that the smile was so pleasing that it seemed divine rather than human, and those who saw it were amazed to find that it was as alive as the original. The technique of the painting itself, which became known as sfumato, or Leonardo's smoke, as well as his masterful use of perspective. To this day, the painting fascinates, as you can see with the photos of the Louvre where it is shown. It is probably the most visited painting and piece of art from the whole of the Louvre. So much so that famously, Beyonce and Jay-Z posed in front of it. Now, in 1516, Leonardo was invited to the royal court in France by King Francois I, and he remained there until his death 3 years later. So what his travels show is, in fact, how artists depended upon powerful patrons, often political leaders, in an age of the consolidation of power and growing states. So military might was crucial, as was careful statecraft. And Leonardo was as valued for his engineering vision as for his artistic vision. Now, how do we know all of this from his artistic and his scientific practice? We know this because he kept numerous notebooks throughout his life. In fact, Leonardo left fewer than 20 paintings, no statue, no machine, no book. But what he did leave behind were 5,000 pages of notes and drawings that he wrote throughout his life. And that remained unnoticed until the 18th century when they were discovered. And you can see examples there of those on your slides. One curious detail is that the handwriting is backwards. That is, to read them correctly, they must be viewed in a mirror. This tells us some things. It tells us that Leonardo was very aware of the uniqueness of his endeavors. First of all, by exploring and inventing machines that might be important for the art of war, so military secrets, if you will, but also because of his exploration of human nature that would have been shunned and even cause for persecution from the Catholic Church. But also because of his love of innovation at all costs. Leonardo included the comment, "Tell me if anything at all was done," on page after page of these notebooks. So in many ways, he embodied the Renaissance idea that every individual has unlimited potential and requires not the monastic life, but a proper environment in which, like a plant, that individual can unfold. He was also of the people. What he saw to be of use to society and not just for himself. And unlike other Renaissance humanists, he took little interest in the supposed wisdom of the ancients. The Greek and Roman texts told him nothing. Everything could be discovered in nature itself, and it was in nature that Leonardo discovered meaning. Through detail and structure, he believed he could uncover nature's grand design, an ideal that would eventually become associated with a scientific revolution to come. For the 15th century, he was the prototype of the explorer of the unknown who gazed at what seemed to be a new world. And although he considered himself a failure, his contemporaries did not think so. Like Raphael, the artist, who paid homage to Leonardo in what is now known as the most famous frescoes of the Renaissance that you can see on your last slide. It is titled The School of Athens and was finished in 1511. The subject of the painting is philosophy, and in fact, love of Greek and Roman philosophies. And commentators have explained that every major Greek philosopher is represented in this painting. Strikingly, some were painted in the likeness of Raphael's contemporaries. And at the center of the painting stands Leonardo, who is represented as Plato, the spirit and the legacy that Renaissance humanists would invoke and that would inspire many afterwards.